What is regeneration? Regeneration is the process of regrowing or restoring or renewing, especially after being damaged or lost. As we look at the fashion industry today, over 60% of fabrics are fossil fuel based, synthetics like polyester. And over 93% of clothing makers don't earn a living wage. This is an industry that's ripe for regeneration. Hi, I'm Garik Himebaugh. I'm the founder of EcoStylist, your trusted guide to discovering sustainable fashion. I'm also on the board of advisors for the SANE Sustainable Fashion Certification, and I've spent the last 5 years working in sustainable fashion. So here's some of what we're seeing from sustainable fashion brands in terms of regeneration. So one thing we're seeing brands investing in regenerative raw materials and fabrics, such as regenerative cotton. We're also seeing brands invest in social regeneration via things like paying their clothing makers living wages. And finally, we're seeing sustainable fashion brands participate in regeneration through investing back in the communities where the clothes are actually being made. Now, as brands, as we think about ways that we can be more sustainable and ways that we can be more regenerative and invest in regeneration, one of the most important things we can do is to be more transparent and to share our journey along that way with our customers. And in this talk, I'm going to tell you why. At EcoStylist, we've researched hundreds of brands over the last 4+ years for sustainability and transparency, with the result being 97 certified sustainable brands on our website, and the vast majority of those hundreds of brands failing our assessment. And the number one reason that brands fail our criteria is a lack of transparency. And that's why the main topic for my talk today with you is going to be transparency, and I'm going to share how your brand can be more transparent. But before I get on with that, I want to tell you why you should invest in being a more transparent brand. You may be thinking, is EcoStylist the only organization that's going to be looking at my brand for transparency? But in fact, the vast majority of authorities in the sustainable fashion space, I would say over 90%, rely on transparency to determine if your brand is ethical and sustainable, and if they should be recommending your brand to their customers, to their audience, etc. We are not the only ones. As far as organizations that rely on transparency, there's EcoStylist, there's Remake, there's Good On You, and the vast majority of sustainable fashion bloggers depend on transparency when they're reviewing your brand and deciding if it's a brand people should support. So as you can see, there's a lot of benefit, a lot of upside for you as a sustainable fashion brand to spend some time working on being more transparent. So essentially, by making your brand more transparent, you can improve your reputation with the vast majority of authorities in the sustainable fashion space, and you can help build trust and gain new customers for your brand for free. So let's get to the meat of the conversation. In order to help your brand be more transparent, I'm going to share the main things that we look for with transparency in brands, and these are also the main things that our peers look for. So these are the exact things you can address to make your brand more transparent. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm going to share how your brand can be more transparent in each of the 3 pillars of our research, which is transparency, fair labor, and sustainability. And so what do I mean by being more transparent in transparency? Well, transparency, the first pillar, addresses whether or not your brand shares information about where and how your clothes or shoes are made. And there's a couple of things, you only have to address a couple of things here that are really going to do 80% of the work for you in being a more transparent brand. And the first one is, do you share information about your tier 1 suppliers? And when we say tier 1 suppliers, what we mean is the cut and sew factories, right? This is typically what people think of when they think of where are clothes made. They're thinking of the factories that are doing the cutting and the sewing. So do you share information about those factories, such as, our clothes are made in Guatemala? But obviously, hopefully you share a lot more than that, right? Do you also share the name of the factories in Guatemala? Do you share, how many there are, the names of each one, the addresses of those factories, and then any additional information you can share is also really great. Like, can you share if those factories have certifications, and if so, which ones? The number of workers in those factories, the wages, any of that you can share is all going to give you a leg up. Number 2, do you share information about your tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers? This is basically just everything else in the process of how the clothes are made. So like, do you share information about the facilities where the fabrics are dyed, where the raw materials are spun and turned into fabric, right? The raw materials themselves, you share information about where those are sourced. The buttons, right? All of this is your tier 3, tier 2, and tier 3. So sharing information about those facilities as well will earn your brand more points in transparency. And finally, do you share how much traceability you have across all of those tiers? For example, some brands will share things like we have 100% traceability of tier 1, 70% of our tier 2 suppliers, and 40% of our tier 3 suppliers, right? It doesn't have to be 100% across the board. Even just being honest about your current level of traceability and your goals to improve is a great way to be a more transparent brand. Number 2, we're going to talk about your transparency as it regards to fair labor and ethical production. And really, there's only 3 things you have to do here as well that are going to do 80% of the work for you. And the first one is wages. Do you pay living wages to the clothing makers, and you share those wages on your website? Ideally, most resources need more information than just a statement that says we pay living wages, right? They're looking for something that they can, because the living wage may not be an agreed upon definition, right? So they're looking for more information, like you share the actual wages. Do you just share the number so that people can back into that and determine for themselves if it's a living wage, right? Do you guarantee, let's say the living wage in your country, let's say a living wage in your country is 1.5 times the minimum wage, right? Because usually the minimum wage is less than a living wage. So if you pay, if a living wage is 1.5 times the minimum wage and that's what you pay, brands often share that. They can say we pay 1.5 times the minimum wage. So some evidence of what the wages are and that they can be determined to be a living wage. 2 is benefits. Do the clothing makers get free lunches or healthcare or transportation to work, education for their kids, things like this? Are there benefits for them? And if so, do you share those benefits on your website? Number 3, finally, do you invest back in the communities where the clothes are made? So in the town or towns where the factories are you investing back in those communities? And if so, are you sharing that information? Now, finally, number 3, are you transparent about your sustainability or your environmental impact? Now, there's more than 3 things here that we look for, so I'll just share a handful of them with you that's going to do, most of the work here. So the first one is do you just share your sustainability goals? Do you have, maybe you have a sustainability page, maybe there's a section of your website where, these are your goals to be more sustainable. This is where you currently are, and this is where you hope to be by 2025, let's say, etc., right? That's first. Second is, do you share your impacts on things like waste, water, and CO2? So do you share the current footprint of each of those? Do you share your milestones, like the progress you've made on each of those? And do you share your goals for each of those? All of these things are things that we and our peers like to see, and that will earn you points. Now, a few other things that we look for is sustainable packaging. Is your packaging recycled? Is it recyclable? Is it compostable? And can that information be found on your website, maybe in your FAQs or on your sustainability page? And then some of the big ones, which are a lot of points, for us, and I think are really important, are things like Are more than half of the fabrics and the raw materials that you source more sustainable? You know, things like hemp or tencel or organic cotton or regenerative cotton. And then you share that information on your website. Do you make it easy for people to know that, 60% of your raw materials are more sustainable? Is it easy to find that information? And then finally, do your raw materials have certifications to ensure that they were sourced, more ethically or more sustainably? And do you share those certifications? And that's it. That's some of the key ways that your brand can be more transparent, can share the good work that you're doing on your website and with your customers. And as I mentioned, it's going to help you build credibility. It's going to help you get good reviews from all of the authorities in the sustainable fashion space, which is ultimately going to lead to better reputation for your brand, more trust, and more customers. So I hope you found this information helpful for how your brand can be more transparent, and good luck in your sustainable fashion journey.